Hello everyone, my name is Prasad Atley and I am a SharePoint developer. Thank you for visiting my blog and this session on SPFx development with React. In today's session, I'll be developing a SPFx web part using React framework. We are going to read SharePoint links list and display links on a web part page. Let's get started. Before starting actual development, I would just like to cover some concepts about the React web part itself and the typical structure of React web part. What I have here is a comparison with Visual Web Part and SPFx React client-side web part. Most of us are used to work with SharePoint server-side .NET web parts, either traditional web parts or visual web part. So let's look at first how the structure of visual web part is. When you create a visual web part, you get a class file, which is a web part file, which is a main container. In this case, homepage webpart.cs, which is a class file. Within this class file, Visual Studio will automatically load a user control, which is an ASCX page along with its own class file. So this is another container within our main web part. That's where we develop our code. Now, imagine that I have to have 2 or 3 different user controls that I would like to put inside this single main user control. If that is the case, then I would build some more some more user controls like quicklinks.ascx, which is for rendering some quick links in this main user control. The news.ascx, which is another user control which is responsible to show the news, and then birthday list.ascx, which is another user control to display birthday list. That's how I would structure my visual web part solution. Now, how does SPFx React client-side web part look? It's almost conceptually similar, where you would have a main web part file. In this case, it will be .ts file, which stands for TypeScript. So you would have a main web part file called homepage webpart.ts, and then inside the ts file you would automatically see a tsx, which is a React component, which is called as a container component, which is exactly conceptually similar to an ASCX main control that we have here. Now within this React component, which is a main React component, we can have sub React components, small React components depending upon our requirements. So in this case, you can create a quick links React component, or let's say news React component, or let's say birthday list React component, and put all of them under the main React component. So basically, that's how the React client-side web part structure is. Each of these components would have their own render methods and their own rendering model or their own rendering function. At this point, we are going to develop this quick links section or quick links render component in React. Okay, so let's get started. So in order to start, I'm going to create my directory here. Homepage web part. I'm gonna change it, and then I'm going to launch your main template. Okay, so there is my web part solution being built at this point. What is your solution name? So I'm going to continue with homepage web part. And I'm going to build at this point for only SharePoint only. Proceed with the current folder. Do you want to allow tenant admin the choice of being able to deploy the solution to all sites immediately without running any feature deployment or adding apps inside? At the moment, I'm just going to say yes. Which type of client-side component to create? Web part. What is your web part name? So I'm going to say home, home, homepage web part. What is your web part description? Homepage web part description. And here at this point, we would have to select a framework. I'm going to select React, and it starts scaffolding our solution here. Let's wait until it completes. So while it creates this, let's go and visit our SharePoint list. So I would go here, I'm gonna close my blog, and then just we can go through our team site. So here I have a team site, and within this team site I have quick links. So quick links is a list of type links in which I have a couple of columns, URL and notes. And at this point, I'm just concentrating on URL. I have 3 items here. First is Ask the Chairman, just added a link to google.com. Next is View All Site Contents, and then next is ADP statements. What we can do at this point is just check a REST API on this, because we're going to call a REST API here. So in order to query the REST API, you just have to have a site name and then add API web list, get by title. My link list name is quick links items, and I'm just putting OData minimal. Just testing this particular URL to ensure that it works fine. And there we go. We get an XML output at this point. So this particular REST API works fine. So we're going to query using this REST URL. Okay, let's go and see where are we on the web part. Oh, still going on. Okay, let's wait for a few more minutes. Okay, so I have my scaffolding complete, and it does say congratulations, your web part is created. So let's go and open Visual Studio Code at this point. Okay, there we go. So we have our Visual Studio Code and solution open in front of us. Let's go and open source folder here and see what we got. So we got a folder called components. We got our web part TS file, which is the main web part TS file, homepage webpart.cs. And then we got the subcomps here, where homepage webpart.tsx, which is our main container component here, and then interface with that component. Okay, so let us begin our work here. So first thing that we are going to do is we go to this interface and add a reference to a SharePoint context. Now, why are we going to do that? Because we need to pass a reference of SharePoint context from main web part to our child web parts or container web part so that it can actually query SharePoint. So in order to do that, we can write this statement here, which is import, and we can say SPHTTP client, and we have to import this from at Microsoft /sp hyphen HTTP. Okay. And then within our interface, we are going to create a variable property of type SPHTTP client. Okay, all good. Next thing what we're going to do is we're going to go to this main web part file, homepage webpart.ts, and as you see here, we already got squiggly here. So let's discuss about this file first. So there are already some references that are brought in by the scaffolding that created a solution. We can see that there are these properties here. There is some squiggly here because we are supposed to send two property variable values and we're just sending one at this point. So that's the reason. Here is the render method and everything. So before touching anything here, let's do one thing. Let's fix this problem here that we see. So in order to do that, all that we need to do at this point is just say comma and sp client context, which is the one that we have added, this dot context dot SPHTTP client. Okay, there we go. And then quickly went off. So now we are passing this to our container web part, the reference of SPHTTP client, which is the library that is being used for querying actual SharePoint data. Okay, let's save this. Control S. All good. Now let's go to our container component, which is homepage webpart.tsx. Okay, some error. That's fine. So let's go ahead and then we're not going to touch render method or anything at this point. This is our container web part here, which is a React component, and it's taking homepage web part properties from the properties that we have sent already. What we can do at this point really is actually define a child component of this container component, and that child component is responsible for rendering the link list. So I'm gonna say export class, and I would say quick links, which actually extends React component. And then I'm just gonna say any at this point. And there we go. So I've just defined this at this point. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is actually going to write a method within our container class, a container component to read SharePoint data. So render method ends here. I'm just going to press some enter here. I'm just going to write a simple simple method to query SharePoint data. Oh, I'm sorry. So it's a private and say get links list data, and I'm going to define promise with any here. Okay. Now, within this method, I'm actually going to call a REST API that we have tested earlier. So I'm going to say return this dot props, which is the properties, and we got this particular property called SP client context. I'm going to say SP client context dot get, and then the URL of the REST API. Okay, and then comma. And then the second parameter to this SP client context is the configuration. So I'm just going to say SP HTTP client dot, oops, sorry, configurations dot v1. That's the configuration that we are going to go with at this point. And then I'm going to say then, now I need to capture the responses. So let's worry about this response, which is of SP HTTP client response. And I'm gonna just say, let's return this response at this point, return response, and I'm gonna return response dot JSON. And then I am going to get the output in data and put it in a state. So this dot set state, and then I'm gonna say links and data dot value. And then we got a lot of squigglies. Let's see why we're getting squigglies here. Okay, so I'm just gonna change this to any. And I'm getting the error here which says cannot find name SP HTTP client response. And that's because I haven't included the SP HTTP client response. From here, if you see default, it has a SP HTTP client. So I need to include this as well in order to get past this squiggly. There we go. There's a space typo error there. And then there is this bracket, which I'm, okay, all good. Still got this problem with private. Let's see why. Okay, so I think I have misaligned this guy here, which is supposed to be here. Okay, all good. So now I got this method get linked list data, which is responsible to read from our list that we have created, quick links, and then all that it does is it gets the response JSON, and then it puts it into that variable, and then I'm just setting a state Now, this web part has to have state so that it can maintain the data, so that whenever the state changes, it can refresh the refresh the web part or refresh the temporary component which in or the DOM that typically React component has, and then it refreshes the actual DOM on the web page. So that is the reason we have to set this state, and I'm setting a state uh, variable or object, I would say, called links, and I'm just passing this data dot value. Okay, so then now I got this. The next thing I need to do actually is, now because I have this state initialized here with the data, it's going to display the data on the page. However, when the page loads, it needs to have this particular object initialized. And in order to do that, um, I would have to initialize in here within the constructor of the page. And it doesn't have the constructor at this point. So let us type this constructor. I would say props, and I'm just passing just the same props that we have here, and the same thing any, then let's put it here. And we got squiggly already. So I'm gonna do is inside this first thing we should call is supers, that way it calls the native constructor of its own, and that takes out that squiggly. Next thing I'm going to do is within the state that I just said some time back, I'm going to initialize our links variable, which is a type array. Okay, all good here. Now we got our SharePoint link list read method here, and then we have also initialized our array of links within our constructor when this component get initialized. So now the next thing that we need to do is we have to add two more things in this main component here. Rather, I would say main container component here. So the first thing that we need to do now is worry about this render thing. So if you see there are so many render divs that we can see here, I'm going to take out all these divs because I don't want the default thing here. And then what I'm going to do here is just gonna put a one default div where it says class name equal to styles of homepage web part. And within this div, what we're going to do now is going to render our quick links component. Basically, this is the main component, child component, or rather the container component that is going to be rendered by a React framework. So within that, we have another component that we have defined here called quick links, and that is the one that we are going to render here. So I'm just going to say quick links. Sorry. And I'm gonna pass a couple of properties here, which is this dot props dot description. And then I'm gonna pass an array of items which we have got after querying state after querying SharePoint list and put it into the state. So this dot state dot links. There we go. So we are setting the state here, and now what we are going to do is we are just going to render it within this. So whatever is the state when this component reads or rather initializes, it will be empty and it's going to display the empty. But then when it actually calls this method, then it actually gets the data and then binds it to the state so that it displays. Oh, but how and where this method is being called? Okay, so that's the next important thing that is missing here, which we are going to do. And I'm going to just say public component did mount. So this particular method, or rather like an event, which is called every time this rendering of this component is almost done. So consider a case like a JavaScript, or sorry, a jQuery library where we are calling that once the jQuery is done, then we actually want to execute the code. This is the same thing where once this component is mounted, this particular code will be called. So at this point on this event, I'm gonna call this method that we have written. Okay, we got that. So now we got everything wired up here. And now let's see what we can do with our quick links component, because we got everything here. Quick links component got the data. Now all that we need to do is just print it on that. Okay, so within this, we don't have a render method right now. So I'm just gonna say public render so that it can render. And within this render method, I'm gonna say h2, just something like reading links list, just some header here. And on top of it, a div, again class name equals styles dot home page web part. Okay, so I forgot to add something here, which is a return clause here, because that's what it is expecting. That's why it's showing that squiggly. Okay, so I'm returning, and that's I have to return an entire HTML here. So I'm returning a div and just putting the div inside here. There we go. Just getting this squiggly here. Just expecting to close that. Okay, that's what I was thinking. So misaligned this. Okay, there we go. So we are good here. So I have this div, and inside that div, I'm just putting this h2 here as a heading. And the next thing that we can do is actually do h3, and then I'm gonna say JSON dot stingify, and then this dot props dot items, because that's what we have added here as a property. So I'm just converting this JSON output in string here. Okay, hopefully everything is good. Just save this as well. And now let's see what we got. I'm just gonna do gulp serve here and compile level code. Okay, so we're getting onto the workbench, but this is a local workbench. So let's go to SharePoint workbench in the SharePoint site and see if we are getting something here. Okay, so I'm gonna launch the workbench here. Okay, it's showing some errors here. We need to fix those first. Property homepage web part does not exist on type homepage web part string container. Okay, so I got two errors earlier, which were showing this particular message, and that is because I spelled the homepage web part incorrect in the styles here, which I just corrected. Let us go back to our workbench and refresh this. Okay, and no more error now. So let's add our web part here. Let us see, we can see our web part. Okay, here we go, homepage new web part. And voila, there we go. So we got an JSON output of our linked list here. So now let us examine this JSON output. However, in order to convert this JSON output in really nice JSON fashion, what we can do and what I typically do is I would just say JSON formatter. And then there are some online JSON formatters. We can select this one or that one. Let's see. Okay, not this. Okay, so let us see this guy. Let's see if we can format that JSON. Okay, so I have here online tool for JSON formatter, and what I did is like I just pasted this JSON output that we have got from querying the OData, and here is the output. So let us copy this output and put it in a SharePoint file and examine. So all that I'm doing here is reading a value property of the data that it has written as part of the JSON output. And this is an array of different records or the other list items that we have. And as we can see here, it shows linked list item. It has all the other properties here, right? So we are good up till here now. So we were able to query JSON output by OData. So next thing that we need to do now is display this output in a nicer tabular fashion. So let's start working on that one. So in order to do that, now since we got output here, we need to capture this output, put it in a object so that we can use that object in order to display the actual data in very nicer format. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go to a components and I'm going to create a new component rather, and I'm going to call it as simple I list item dot ts. Okay, so I got iListItem.ts, which is an interface here, and I'm gonna say export interface I link list item, and I'm gonna say, okay, let's go back to our output because I would like to show something. As you can see, these are just straightforward string or number property value. However, when we go to URL, if you see, it's like an structure or a type of class which has sub properties called description and URL. So in order to capture this, we need another interface, and that's what we are going to create it now here. Export interface. I'm sorry. Export class, and I'm gonna say URL object. And in this object, I'm just gonna say public property called URL, which is of type string, and another public property which is of type description, which is of type string, which is a property called description. This is exactly matching with these two. And please ensure that you need to match casing as well. That way JSON formatter will be able to correctly populate your object. Now in interface, I'm going to define properties called ID, which is again of type number, and then URL, which is a type URL object. Okay, so now I got an interface object interface here, and I have class within that interface. All that we need to do now is capture the output and populate the list of this object here. So let's go back to our rendering component here in quick links. And in this now, I'm going to do something before rendering here. So I'm going to define a new variable here, which I'm going to call it as link lists, link list items. That's what I'm reading. And this will be of type I link list item. That's what we define. However, we want to define it as an array. Okay, that's what I got it wrong. I should be putting this inside the render method. Oh, sorry. Var link list items of type I link list item, which is what we have defined to capture the output of linked list, and I'm making it as an array here. And then next thing I'm going to do is simple. I'm going to populate this object by doing a JSON.parse, and on top of that I'm just going to put this same thing that we have here, JSON.stringify properties items. Basically we have already a JSON output. I'm just going to parse it, and it's going to put it in this object. Now I got this object here. The next thing I need to do is now worry about printing it in a little nicer fashion. In order to do that, I'm just going to take this guy out now because we don't need it anymore. And then I'm going to say define a table. Now within this table, let's build something to print. So I'm going to say link list item array that we have defined here, and because it is an array, I can do a map on it, and I'm gonna say element, which is a variable, and then I'm gonna return where I'm gonna write a new row now, and within this row I want to print two things. So first column I'm gonna print element.id, which is ID of our list item, and then second column, sorry, and in second column I'm going to print URL dot description. Okay, cool. Let us save this and see where we reached. So let's go back to our, let's see if there is any error, and there is no error. So let's go back to our web part and just refresh it in our workbench and see what happens. There we go. So now we are successfully able to print the ID and description of that link. Cool. Okay, so now the only thing remaining here is to add a actual link on top of this description so that user can click on that link and visit that link. So in order to do that, let's see something. So what I'm going to do here is, this is the description that we have. I'm just going to simply say ahref, and within the href property here, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to type element dot url dot url. There we go. Let's see. And we got no error. Let's go back and refresh. Cool. So we got links now, and let's mouse over it and see what we got. And we are able to see actual links that we have added in SharePoint. So let's right click and open a new window and see what it goes. So there we go. I'm able to visit Google now. The next one is view all site contents. So let's click on this open new link, and then we are able to go to view all site contents. And then third one was ADP statements, which is an external link, and I'm going to go and visit ADP when I click that. So that's perfect. So now we successfully were able to query SharePoint linked list and print the data list items and add a hyperlink on that so that users can click this link. There we go. Thank you. Thanks for the visiting our blog. This session ends here. Let's meet in the next session with something new. Thank you.